Hey guys, what's up? This is Meylo, and I wanted to take some time today to talk about the 2.0 version of my website. It's my portfolio. I made some major changes, although the design aesthetic is not too different from the old one. I just wanted to talk to you about the new development environment, some of the new technologies that I'm using, the fact that this one is responsive, the old one is not. And I also want to talk a little bit about page load speeds and HTTP requests. And so before I go into the new one, which is the one we're looking at right here, let's look at the old one. From a UX standpoint, it's still a very basic layout. I think people will understand it and people can use it well. But let's dive into the code here. You can see that it looks pretty basic. But I am using 263 lines of code here, and I'm calling a lot of JavaScript or JS functions within the page, and some of them are actually being used 3 times when it should only be one function that's being shared amongst all these links. And the biggest thing here is that it's not responsive. When I do something like this and decrease the size of my window, it should respond and it should change the columns or whatnot. So the new one actually does, and you can see it in this. Here's the iPhone 6 layout, and we can actually switch over and look at this same layout on an iPad. And let's turn it this way. No, that's good. Let's turn it this way, and let's see here. So this is a 2-column layout. Now back to the desktop, which is 3-column. There's a couple of things happening here that I'm not completely in love with either. Number one, it's slow. And the reason is, after running some page tests, I've discovered that I'm using Font Awesome here, and I'm actually using 4 of the icons out of the 550 icon library. And that's all going into my CSS, and there's no need to load all that when I'm only using 4 of the 540 that I need. I'm also calling the fonts here are coming from Google, and that's slowing down my page because that's another external HTTP request. And another thing I wanted to talk about is the separation between the old environment and the new environment. So back in the day, when you're working with your pages here, they look a lot something like this. You got your index file, and then you got your assets, and then everything else that you are trying to use. Back then this was a really clean setup. You didn't have a bunch of pages, and this is basically a single page website. And go back in the late 2007 to single page websites were just kind of becoming popular. But now we have a different file structure. I have a lot more going on here. So what's happening here is I'm having all my CSS inside of this SAS folder and all my JavaScript in this folder, and I'm in this gulp.js environment now. So what is happening here is that I'm listing all of my JavaScript, what my CSS is doing, and I'm also separating back and forth between a production environment and a development environment. And the development environment looks something like this. If I go to my builds, I've got 2 folders, right? Still very basic structure. If I open my index file, it looks something like this. And this is a very clean layout. It's not minified, not yet. Once I decide I want to go into the actual production environment, then my code looks something like this. So the reason is for page load speed. And the way the server works is if you can get rid of as many line breaks as possible, it's just going to run through that code and load it super fast. And CSS is doing the exact same thing in the production environment, and all of my JavaScript is doing that as well. So this is strictly just what's going to sit on the server, but I'm not going to be able to read any of this if I need to make changes. So what I do is I make my changes inside of the development folder, and when it's time to produce, I run my I'd run my gulp.js again. That's what I'm doing here on the command line, and it'll just take every file that's inside of my development folder and compress it. And then I move those files over. Super cool. So now, when I actually am trying to test the page here, I'm going to do that here. Ignore the last numbers you saw. This is the live site, what's going on right now. And it is showing some issues with my CSS. It's not working correctly, and I'm going to attribute that to the Font Awesome. And also, it's having that an extra HTTP access, and it's calling 2 fonts from Google. And aesthetically, these fonts aren't any different than, this is one font from Google and this is the other, the View. This is not any different than Georgia, and this is not anything different from Helvetica. And these are all fonts everyone already has in their systems. So I started working on the 2.0.1 version, and I'm making a lot of these changes. I've got rid of Font Awesome. I'm calling some local fonts, eliminating a lot of extra HTTP requests. And so you can see that my current mobile site needs a little bit of love. The desktop version is working pretty well. I have a subfolder called test with the changes that I've made, and it's still in development, but let's check it out. So we can see that our mobile version is 90% out of the 100, and we've eliminated almost entirely the problems with the CSS and that external HTTP request for the fonts. And I'm just going back to using Georgia and using Helvetica. And yeah, I need to do some CSS work. And over here, this font, you can tell that the logo, which is a SVG file, is just huge, and it's not right. But also on the desktop, check this out, 96 out of 100. So I've eliminated a lot of the problem, and I look forward to seeing maybe someday if I can hit that 100. There's sites out there that are bragging about it. I'd love to try and get there someday, but it's going to take some work, and maybe the 3.0 version will be able to do that. But as long as you have to call HTTP requests externally, it's going to be really tough. So it's best to try and keep everything on your server, and that includes your call for Java jQuery. People use a CDN for that, either from Google or from jQuery directly. Copy it over. You can see that all my JavaScript is right here, and I'm actually calling jQuery 2.1.3, which is the latest version currently. And any of the JavaScript that I'm working with here is this is my own stuff, that I actually wrote for the page. At the end of the day, it gets concatenated, and it loads super fast. I've even included my Google Analytics into here, and so there's super clean code. I'd love to see someone else's website locally here that is doing anything like this, and that makes me want to talk a little bit about have you had any experience with gulp.js? If not, check it out. Leave me some feedback, some comments. Go to this website right here, gulp.js.com. Go into their plugins and find the items that are going to help you and create a better workflow for you. And talk to me a little bit about it. Thanks, guys. Sorry I made this extra long, but I had fun and I wanted to talk a little bit about it. Cheers.